Hello and welcome. I am Zerbraxi, and this is my top 10 or 15 or 20 games of the decade. 20 of the decade. So what I did here actually was I took two games from every year of the decade from 2010 to 2019. So two from 2010, two from 2011, etc. And I then took all of those and put those games in a list of 20 till 1. I had to do 20. I couldn't do 10. I struggled. It was not happening. So that's what I went with. And it's slightly convoluted, but I hope you enjoy the list nonetheless. Of course, if you disagree with certain games that are on this list or you wish other games were on this list, please let me know in the comments below. Odds are I probably think they're just as great as you do, and they just happen to not be on here. So enjoy the video. If you like it, click the like button. If you dislike it, throw me a thumbs down and tell me how much you hate me and wish I would die. And subscribe if you want to see more general gaming stuff. Without further ado, though, let's just get into the video. Top 20 games of the decade. Wow, it's a long time. It's been fun. Enjoy. I'm a pretty big fan of open-world superhero-style games. Titles like SpiderMan II, Prototype, and Infamous are some standouts for me. Well, in 2014, we received Infamous Second Son, which was great, and Infamous First Light, which I absolutely adored. Infamous First Light came out after Second Son, but serves as a chronological prequel. The story of Fetch and her brother is one of incredible power and ability, while also diving into depression and drug addiction. First Light also plays this beautiful balance act of feeling powerful and untouchable, while also very vulnerable and emotionally disturbed. Fetch's story is filled with tragedy and heartache, but it feels so great to overcome these hardships. In many ways, First Light is identical to the gameplay of Second Son, but Fetch just landed with me more. Her neon-themed powers provide a great visual flair, alongside intricate combos that can be weaved together. Great characters, great gameplay, great story, and all of these great visuals kick Infamous First Light right into my top 20 of the decade. In a world filled with battle royales and Fortnite clones, there exists Apex Legends. This is definitely Respawn's most notable game, and it's taken the world by storm. Storm. That's a good battle royale joke, am I right? Alright, good one. But this isn't about Apex. Instead, I want to talk about Respawn's best game in my eyes, Titanfall 2. 2016 was a crazy year for shooters, and a pretty good year in general for gaming. However, Titanfall 2 stood out to me in a way I wasn't expecting. The campaign is a mixture of mech fights, platforming, and running and gunning. The relationship between Jack Cooper and BT-7274 is something truly fun and emotional. The single player isn't where the fun ends either. Multiplayer in Titanfall 2 is some of the best chaos in a shooter I've ever experienced. Character and mech customization is handled incredibly well. The balance between pilot and Titan is almost like a dance, as each side has advantages over the other. I had no idea I'd like Titanfall 2 as much as I did, but it became one of my all-time favorite shooter experiences ever. Oh, and it deals with time travel at times. I mean, come on, how is that not cool? Remember that moment like a minute or so ago that I mentioned how much I liked open-world superhero games? Well, welcome 2018's SpiderMan. This game rocks. If you want to play a great open-world game, you'll love this. If you want to play a good superhero game, you're gonna love this. And if you want to play a good Spider-Man game, you will love this. If you like Miles Morales, then get to the back of the line, because I'm next, and there's no cutting this man-crush line, alright? Spider-Man 2018 basically nails everything. Story, gameplay, collectibles, costumes, web-slinging, all of it. It even gives some good attention to a lot of the B-tier Spider-Man villains. A lot of what I want to say about this game deals with spoilers, so unfortunately I can't say too much more. However, one thing that can't be understated is the different costumes that Peter Parker gets to wear. The variety in design, creativity, and all the nods to the old Spider-Man mythos is truly appreciated here. Couple that with the fact that each costume has some serious gameplay implications, and hunting for this cosmetic reward now becomes even more intriguing. There's a bit of a sequel bait at the end, and normally this bothers me, but I'm just too dang excited to see what happens next in this franchise. Oh, and also, I'm not sure, have you seen Miles Morales in this game? He's my forever girl. This past decade has made a massive push forward into the realm of esports. We've seen some of the largest tournaments and prize pools for gaming tournaments ever. Entire leagues, such as the Overwatch leagues, have been formed, and even the ESPN website itself has an esports tab on it now. One of the games that helped push this most would be the sequel to a fan-made mod, Dota II. At the peak of the MOBA genre, Dota 2 released to compete against League of Legends and Heroes of Newerth at the time. While League is still alive and kicking, Dota 2 has continually proven itself to be the king of the genre. Specifically, the business model, being a true free-to-play, is one of the greatest strengths. Just download the game and you have every character in the game unlocked. Hey, League of Legends, do you see that? That's called a good business model. How about you, I don't know, how about you suck a little less, huh? Yeah, guys, I got him. Yeah. Do you think we're done with esports? Stop it. Get some help. We got Starcraft II next on the list. The original Starcraft is arguably the flame that ignited what esports is today. There's a lot more to Starcraft II than that, though. I will stand to this day that the Starcraft II Wings of Liberty campaign is the best RTS campaign ever made. The first playthrough of this game changed the way I look at strategy games as a whole, and there were still 2 more expansions coming, being Heart of the Swarm and Legacy of the Void. When I think of the gameplay of Starcraft II, all I can think of is the word precision. Everything requires precision, but also everything the game does feels so precise. The continued story of Jim Raynor and Sarah Kerrigan, Queen of the motherfucking Blades, never got old. If you like RTS games, then Starcraft II is the best you'll probably ever play. A game like Portal 2 still feels like it probably shouldn't have been made. The humor in this title is almost too funny for its own good. The puzzles are about as perfect as a puzzle game can provide. And top that off with an entirely separate multiplayer campaign that provides arguably even better puzzles in the single player. That is the legacy Portal 2 will leave with me. I've gone on record from a previous video saying that I think the original category of perfect game is where Portal 1 lies, but the fact that Portal 2 sits on the line to enter that category as well is such a feat that the developers should be so proud of. Something still funny to me though is that Portal 2 spawned its very own physics curriculum. Yeah, that's right. Portal 2's map editor offers so much control and the physics is so real-world accurate that an entire education course was developed using Portal 2 as the foundational tool. It's one of the best puzzle games I've ever played in my life, and even makes me smarter too. Ugh. And I know what you're thinking. How could I possibly get any smarter? I know. It's hard to believe, but Portal 2 somehow did it. I don't know how, but it happened. The Legend of Zelda: A Link Between Worlds is a game that just quite honestly surprised me. For a while, I wasn't interested in the gameplay gimmick, and I was very concerned they would do wrong by the legacy of A Link to the Past. I also really hated the sound of the weapon renting system, and the graphics just didn't look very good to me. Oh, and I did that thing eventually called playing it, and it quickly became one of my favorite Zeldas of all time. The pacing due to the renting system is very well done, with only some slight annoyances along the way. The dungeons are some of the best in the series, and one of the best things about the game, though, is its soundtrack. Whether it's references to A Link to the Past or new additions to the franchise, the tracks are all incredibly creative and fun. Specifically, anything played at the Milk Bar, especially Zelda's Lullaby, is a real knockout for the entire franchise. A Link Between Worlds may be one of the best Zelda games in the franchise to me. However, it's not quite my favorite Zelda game of the decade. That's gonna have to go to the next game on this list. In some ways, I actually have a very love-hate relationship with Breath of the Wild. Specifically, I hate the dungeons. Ever since playing the first Zelda on the NES, it's consistently the dungeons that bring me back to every Zelda title. Breath of the Wild's dungeons, though, are the worst in the series by far, and exist on their own level of garbage tier that is inexcusable for the franchise. Also, while I love the ambient tracks in the world, the lack of much of the fun music that Zelda is known for just feels like such a missed opportunity. The soundtrack of Breath of the Wild can genuinely get boring at times, and being boring is a cardinal sin of any art form, especially something as big as Zelda. And yet, Breath of the Wild just does everything so dang good that I tend to forget about those problems pretty quickly. Well, except the dungeons, they actually suck. However, Breath of the Wild is the first time I think the franchise actually felt like an RPG, and as an RPG, it succeeds with flying colors. The way that terrain and environment has an effect on Link is loads of fun considering all the tunics and tools that exist in the game. The fact that Breath of the Wild doesn't ever really give you anything, but instead you have to hunt and search out every part of the game to get your reward, and it feels like this iteration of Hyrule feels like a true, living, breathing world. Everything you have done in Breath of the Wild is the result of you either stumbling upon a surprise or you actively exploring and exposing something's location. So little is ever directly told to you, but instead hints and tools are given to the player at just the right times to always feel like you could have figured it out. Despite my gripes with Breath of the Wild, Despite my gripes with Breath of the Wild, I have a love and appreciation for what this game is, and it's my favorite Zelda of the last decade. If there's a game on this list that I considered underrated, it's Kingdoms of Amalur: Reckoning. I've gone on record saying that I prefer this game to many RPGs of this generation, and especially over the juggernaut that is Skyrim. To me, as far as the quality of content goes, as far as the crafting feels, as character builds and skill goes, and especially in terms of combat, I think Amalur is better than Skyrim in all of those ways. Beyond just comparing it to an Elder Scrolls title, Kingdoms of Amalur exists within a creative and innovative fantasy world that I constantly find myself referring to. The narrative behind all the characters and races inhabiting Amalur is gripping, and in many cases, super original. While many RPGs of the last decade have these big, sprawling worlds to play in, Amalur shrinks the size down slightly, but loads its world with a plethora of enjoyable content. This is not a game where you're going to travel long spreads with nothing going on. Quests and events are happening everywhere, and it's a game I just can't ever stop recommending. Oh, and because of the Destiny card system, your character builds can be truly anything you want, from going all into magic to being a little bit of a warrior rogue, to being most balanced and crazy build you ever wanted. Every possible range of character builds become viable and gains unique benefits due to this system. If you enjoy open world RPGs, but would rather have something that can also be treated as a little more streamlined and a focused experience, with some damn good combat and character building, then please check this game out. There's a rumor of an HD remake on the way, and if this is the case, then I can't wait to play this game again. Kingdoms of Amalur: Reckoning is one of my favorite RPGs of all time, and I really hope more people go back to give it a shot. Number 11, the game that just missed being in the top 10 of the decade. I have a lot to say about Control, but I've just recently talked about it in my top 10 games of 2019 video, as well as my top games of 2019 podcast I did over on my second channel, Jerry Rigged. Click on the card at the top to check it out if you want to see some more long-form content. However, to put some thoughts into this video here, let's go with this. Control makes absolutely no sense, and it's this complete lack of understanding that makes it one of the most fun games you'll ever play. Quote-unquote defying expectation is the phrase where I constantly think of when I talk about Control. Everything about this game truly does defy what you'd expect it to be about, especially if you've only just seen it. So let me end this section with this summary of my best explanation of Control. Control is the best Alan Wake, Jedi Fallen Order, story-based, collectathon, first-person shooter, Hollow Knight-ish, Mass Effect paranormal game with RPG mechanics that I've ever played. Let's throw that quote in a box and call it a day. Mass Effect 2 came out in January 2010, and holy cow did the decade open strong with this one. BioWare nailed everything about the genre in this game. Despite the narrative choices not being maybe quite as strong as, say, Dragon Age Origins the year prior, dialogue never once got boring in this game, where you talk for about 75% of the time. The other 20% of the time consists of running to new dialogue, with about 5% left over for actual action. Despite narrative being such an overwhelming portion of the game, Mass Effect 2 attracted all sorts of gamers that quickly fell in love with this title. Every character in this game is great to have around, and it's one of the few games that I instantly started a New Game Plus when I completed it. Mass Effect 2 will go down as one of the greatest sequels of all video games. And the finale to the trilogy wrapped up everything nicely and provided a real closing point where all of your previous actions and decisions were harmoniously weaved into a crescendo of incredible and... No, the ending of the series sucked. 'Cause of course it did. Platinum Games is one of my all-time favorite studios, and the Bayonetta series is definitely one of the reasons why. While the first game is incredible and involves a boss literally throwing galaxies at you, its sequel is a better game in absolutely every aspect. Bayonetta 2 goes on the list of perfect sequels, alongside games like Mass Effect 2 and Diablo 2. Action combat has never felt better than this point, and I still think it's the best feeling spectacle fighter on the market. The combo system and arcade-style points return similar to titles like Devil May Cry. Where Bayonetta shines, though, over its competition more than anything, is Witch Time. The ability to dodge on a dime, regardless of whatever action you're doing, means the game can be brutally aggressive with you because the player has complete control to dodge over every single attack. Because of this combat in Bayonetta, it's the most satisfying thing in the world. Crazy characters, hilarious comedy, and lots of hair. These things throw Bayonetta 2 onto the top 10 games of the decade for myself. Fire Emblem Three Houses is one of the best strategy games ever made. It's a bold statement, and I have no quantitative value or proof of it, but I've said it, and it's on the internet. It's officially a fact, and if you disagree with me, well, then you probably actually have a pretty good argument, especially if you bring up games like Final Fantasy Tactics, Suikoden 2, or Shining Force 3. But I'm still going to say it's one of the best. I don't want to spend too much time here, as it was also on my favorite games of 2019 list. However, a quick summation of my feelings would be that I love Edelgard, Raphael, and Lysithea. They all rock, and the Black Eagles are the best by far. Just saying. 1v1 me and Smash if you disagree. Monster Hunter World is a lot of things when it comes to the Monster Hunter franchise. In many ways, it's the natural evolution, but it's also a massive departure from the previous entries. And it's also by far my favorite Monster Hunter game to date. I've played every Monster Hunter game since Monster Hunter Freedom Unite, and it's been a wild ride seeing how this franchise has gone over the past decade. This is where Monster Hunter World comes in. Everything is kicked up a notch here. Weapons and items all feel like they have more flair and impact than before. The world genuinely feels like this dense, undiscovered ecosystem. Even the monster's behavior, it feels like a real animal. I'm using the word feel a lot here intentionally. In many ways, Monster Hunter World is imperfect, but everything feels so damn good that you forget about its shortcomings so fast. Grinding for loot and fighting bosses with your friends has never felt better in a video game, and Iceborne has only made this game even better. This is a franchise I am not planning on leaving anytime soon. As of the recording of this video, Supergiant Games has created Bastion, Transistor, and Pyre, with Hades currently on the way. It's been a real fun journey with this company so far, especially with titles like the incredible and innovative Transistor under their belt. For me, Bastion, though, is the game that will never leave my list of favorite video games. It's one of those games that I actively try to find excuses to bring up in conversation. Even after all these years, I still think of Bastion's art style, the voice of the narrator, the crisp action combat, the variety of the items, and the insanely good soundtrack that I firmly believe stands alongside some of the best indie OSTs, such as Super Meat Boy and Undertale. Actually, I think Bastion genuinely has one of the best and varied soundtracks in gaming as a whole. Playing as the kid through this fun but perilous world is something I did over and over and over. The New Game Plus features and relic system allow you to create some insane levels of difficulty, and the game is just too much fun to stop playing, so of course, I had to try a full relic run. This last decade was one of the best it's ever been for indie developers, both in terms of quantity and quality of games. To have Bastion this high on my list is still, though, not enough praise, but it's the best that I can give for now. What better way to start off the top 5 of the decade with a double entry? Because I couldn't choose one from this time. So surprise, top 6 games of the decade, or top 21 games of the decade for the list. Here's a bonus. Enjoy. The way video games can tell stories is far more varied than any other form of media. 2015 released with some of the best video games ever, not just in the decade. And in that list, 2 of the best stories I've ever experienced were there. Number 5 is both Life is Strange and Undertale. Let's start with Life is Strange first. Let me also open that I do not like this genre of pseudo point-and-click adventure games, this thick slice of lifestyle game. Yet, I started this game off of a recommendation, and I just never wanted to stop. The story of Max and her friends is so gripping, and all of the choices and narrative feels so genuine. Everything about the characters really reaches out to you, like they're all real people, and you, the player, are kind of just along for the ride from this integration of yourself into their lives. To say it feels exactly like being a teenager is almost an understatement, as every detail about this time of life is nailed with perfection. Life is Strange is also one hell of an emotional ride. I didn't cry just once, nor twice, not even just 3 times, but over a handful of times throughout this game. It also left me physically stunned and unable to move or make a choice at least 2 or 3 different times. In fact, choices in both episode 4 and 5 quite literally made me take breaks from the game because of the emotional bombardment I felt. And while Life is Strange is an overload of raw reality, Undertale spins story into the best example of addressing the player that I've ever seen in video games. Undertale's plot is not about Frisk or Chara. The narrative here isn't about the actual events of the plot itself. Instead, Undertale shines in challenging the way that we even play video games. It forces us to look in the mirror of our actions and behavior that have become routine when engaging in this entertainment medium. Why do we attack the first boss? Well, because we're so trained to fight bosses and overcome them. Yet the game challenges that. The challenge behind Undertale isn't just because Sans is hard and he has an incredible theme song, or the fact that Undyne in her emotional encounter is so memorable. The real challenge behind Undertale is acknowledging that being a veteran gamer actually puts you at a disadvantage here narratively. Looking at Undertale through the eyes of inexperience is the best way to play. These two games are masters of storytelling, came out both in the same year, and are two of my all-time favorites of the decade. It is still crazy to me that Horizon Zero Dawn and Breath of the Wild came out within 3 to 4 days of each other. Both are open-world adventures with prophetic antagonists. Both deal with the consequences of a post-apocalyptic world, but set in a beautiful and colorful environment. Both games even deal with technological creatures being the primary antagonistic forces of the world. I played both these games back-to-back, and Horizon Zero Dawn is my second favorite open-world game, hands down. When it comes to the open-world genre here, this opportunity to be overwhelmed by the sheer amount of stuff you can do tends to happen, but Horizon doesn't make that mistake. I mean, yeah, there's an awful lot to do in the game, but the pacing at which you stumble upon these things is so brilliantly handled that you never once feel overwhelmed by optional tasks or distracted from the main story. RPG mechanics in these types of games are some of the bread and butter, and the customization and choices for Aloy is spot on. It feels like every possible playstyle was considered with skill choices. Finding, buying, and crafting items also feels so good, mostly because it never went too overboard. Horizon has less empty space than, say, Skyrim, less RPG mechanics as, say, The Witcher, and even less dialogue options as, say, Mass Effect or Dragon Age. But it seems to nail a beautiful balance of all of its inspirations so perfectly. Guild Wars 2 is the game I've returned back to more than anything else this past decade. Since its launch in 2012, I've spent thousands of hours exploring the world of Tyria, engaging in its lore, battling world bosses and dungeons, playing massive siege battles in its world vs. world format, and my favorite, playing its masterful competitive PvP scene. The original Guild Wars was the closest thing we've ever received to a Diablo-style MMO, but it twisted it to focus on horizontal progression instead of strictly player power. This is developed even further in the sequel, and with the constant free living world updates that ArenaNet puts out, there are entire new zones and massive storylines being released every couple months. If we're talking value for money here, Guild Wars 2 is unrivaled, especially considering it's not pay to win, and it doesn't have a sub fee, something most MMOs can't claim. When it comes to the MMO genre, it's hard to have this level of class diversity and build diversity as Guild Wars games do. There's a reason that the original was nicknamed Build Wars. The sequel still represents that more than ever. I could do a whole video as to why I still feel that Guild Wars 2 is the best MMO on the market as a whole package, despite games like Final Fantasy XIV and World of Warcraft still completely dominating the PvE scene. ArenaNet struck a great balance of every type of content, and some of its game modes are still the best on the market, specifically anything related to its PvP. The Fractal Systems is still a better progression versus things like WoW's Mythic Plus, and there isn't anything that does World v World nearly as stable as Guild Wars. If you want to play an MMO that does everything well, with a very active player base, then check this game out. The Witcher 3. It's so crazy that just saying the title pretty much sums up everything I could say. CD Projekt Red and the Witcher series of games have become synonymous with progression, innovation, and perfection. Every title in the trilogy gets better and better until it culminates into what many have claimed to be the best game of all time, The Witcher 3. Honestly, I can't even fight those people, or even partially disagree with them very much. Because of these games, I have also started reading the books, which are also great. For a number 2 on this list, I feel like I should say more, but I'm seriously coming up short of anything new to add. It's The Witcher 3. You know it's one of the greatest things ever made, and that's that. Alright, next game. The first year of Overwatch's life is hands down one of the most fun gaming experiences I've ever had. Just that trailer Blizzard showed and all the gameplay footage to follow filled me with so much hype, and it just didn't stop. It felt like every match was better and better as I myself would become better at the game. Every hero had a counter, and it developed into this super fun rock, paper, scissors metagame every match. I still remember this spreadsheet that I used for reference for quite a while to help counterpick characters that my team was losing against. The ability to swap heroes on the fly is something I still think is understated. Even games similar to Overwatch like Paladins locks you into your hero choice. It's a level of dynamic and reactive gameplay that nothing has ever done before or done since. The promise of new characters and new game modes was exciting for about a solid year. Overwatch seemed untouchable. Ana was released, and if she was the example of new heroes to be introduced to Overwatch, then this was going to be insane. However, time went on, and the new hero design really screwed up the risk-reward to gameplay. Time to kill has constantly gotten shorter and shorter until death in less than a second has become commonplace. We've still not received a new game mode introduced to this game as of the recording, and while I adore the Overwatch League, it single-handedly and intentionally killed the other incredible Overwatch tournaments like Summit and of course the king of Overwatch tournaments, the Korean Apex. I'm being a bit negative for my number 1 so far, but it's because despite all of this crap and all of the nonsense and stupid stuff that Blizzard has done with Overwatch over the last year or two, it doesn't change how I still love this game so much. Overwatch just feels so damn good to play. To this day, I will still hop into the game, or even just the practice range, just to get the feeling of playing Overwatch, because it's so satisfying to interact with. That feeling of coming back in a match because you and your team organized a perfect counterpick and engagement is a level of hype I've not felt since raiding in WoW. I'm still watching every single Overwatch League match, and I'm enjoying the meta shifts in the game currently. I can't wait to see what Overwatch 2 will bring to the table, because as of right now, Overwatch is my favorite shooter of all time, my favorite of last decade, and one of my all-time favorite games ever.